NYU School of Professional Studies. This series, Conflict, Security, Development, has a long history. It began in the Puck building when we were still alive, but it was at least 12 years ago. And initially, it was a partnership between the Robert F. Wagner School International Program and the School of Professional Studies Center for Global Affairs. But it became so popular that we were soon joined by other NYU schools. The first to join was the Center for Human Rights and Justice at NYU Law. The second was the Robert L. Bernstein Institute for Human Rights. Then the program in international relations at the Graduate School of Arts and Science at NYU. And then the College of Global Public Health. I think that's it for now. So the series actually expanded, and each of these partners contributes several sessions to the series so that you will get a very, very different perspectives on conflict, security, development. Today, it is CGA's turn. So what is CGA? I always describe it that the center is home to various sectors, 3 or 4. First, graduate programs. Graduate program in global affairs, which is now in its 16th year and going strong. A relatively new one on global security, conflict, and cybercrime. And then there are a ton of freestanding courses, non-degree, as well as certificates, and public events such as the one that you're viewing today. In addition, we do quite a bit in the field with grant-funded programs that our faculty offer. So that's CGA in a nutshell, but I hope you'll be back with us for other events. It is my privilege, and I'm really actually very thrilled now to introduce you to David Gutschmit, who in the course of a career of about 37 years has held a variety of management positions within the intelligence community and within the CIA, and has done some phenomenal intelligence work. He's a 1980 graduate of Georgetown University School of Foreign Service, but I also share something with him because we both have at different stages of our lives masters from the School of Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins. David is currently teaching at Georgetown University and consulting to private sector clients on risk management, leadership, and strategy. But I'm pleased to tell you that he'll also be teaching an open enrollment course with a fascinating topic, espionage: fact versus fiction, in our non-degree program in the spring. And then in our graduate program, he's teaching espionage and economic power again in the spring. So please help me to welcome David Gutschmit virtually rather than in person. Gutschmit, sorry. So let's welcome him to this program.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I really appreciate the opportunity to deliver this talk on the intelligence community and COVID-19. It's a topic I feel very strongly about. As you mentioned, I come at this talk as a 37-year veteran of the CIA's Directorate of Operations. That's the clandestine arm of the CIA that specializes in human intelligence. Numerous assignments in the foreign field and at headquarters, mostly dealing with the East Asian region. I was fortunate enough to have several assignments to other elements of the intelligence community, including the FBI and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. So I'm hopefully also bringing a community perspective to this discussion. As you mentioned, I've been teaching intelligence studies at Georgetown to graduate students since 2016, and I'm really looking forward to my evolving relationship with NYU. Before I get started, I'm required to put down a couple of caveats. What I'm going to talk about today represent my personal views and not those of the CIA or any elements of the intelligence community. And also, my comments are not for attribution. I guess we'll be applying Chatham House rules today. Well, thank you. Now, why was I so eager to do this talk? It's because of a late March article in Foreign Policy, the title of which was "The Coronavirus is the Worst Intelligence Failure in U.S. History." So the term intelligence failure is about the worst thing you want to hear as an intelligence officer. Of course, it immediately evokes fiascos like Pearl Harbor, 9/11, and Iraq weapons of mass destruction, with the implication that intelligence was not collected, overlooked somehow, or that those proverbial dots were not correctly connected. So the very first point I want to make today is this is not that. There's an old saying in the intelligence community that there are only two kinds of outcomes in national security events. The first outcome is a policy success. The second outcome is an intelligence failure. However, that I believe that the postmortems over the next months or years will support facts that are in fact already in evidence. The U.S. failure to be adequately prepared for the pandemic does not represent an intelligence failure. Now, there are numerous possible reasons for the severity of the pandemic in the U.S., but the lack of intelligence early in the crisis isn't one of them. Why is this distinction important to us? Intelligence failures, at least in the U.S., are generally accompanied by exhaustive reviews leading to reforms and restructuring to address perceived shortcomings, real shortcomings, and most of all, to avoid repetition. Now, in other systems, particularly those of Russia and North Korea, those found responsible for an intelligence failure are simply taken out and shot. But fortunately, that's not the way we do things in our system. In the wake of 9/11, for example, we had the 9/11 Review Commission. This led to the most extensive changes to the intelligence community since the National Security Act of 1947, which established the CIA and the intelligence community as we know it. These changes included the formation of the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, the creation of the position of Director of National Intelligence as the nominal head of the U.S. intelligence community and the President's chief advisor on intelligence, and a corresponding reduction in the role and possibly influence of the CIA director. We need to avoid that in this case. The focus has to be on other points of failure regarding the pandemic and how we can avoid these. I contend that the intelligence community was and is adequately structured to address the challenge posed by the pandemic, and I'm going to discuss this in further detail. However, this is not to say that the U.S. intelligence community has nothing to learn from the pandemic. It does represent a new form of challenge to the intelligence community, and I want to explain this as well. But as we search for scapegoats, we can't blame the intelligence community for any failure of existing and available intelligence to be successfully incorporated into policy responses to the pandemic. It's an inevitable and positive aspect of the U.S. intelligence system that the role of the IC is to inform, not to dictate policy. Policymakers can accept intelligence from the IC or disregard it. They are free to do so. Again, we're not Putin's Russia or Xi's China, where intelligence officials operating with correct information or not can directly dictate policy outcomes. This is frustrating for the U.S. intelligence community and can certainly, excuse me, lead to bad policy outcomes. But this firewall between intelligence and policy formulation is in fact a crucial aspect of our intelligence system and those of other democratic societies. Both the size and the culture of the U.S. intelligence system contribute to its ability to monitor the evolving pandemic almost from its inception. Now, the U.S. is sometimes criticized for the size and apparent redundancy in its intelligence community. However, with 17 agencies following a very wide range of national security and foreign policy issues, the depth and breadth of the USIC are simply unmatched. The Defense Intelligence Agency houses a dedicated organization that is ideally positioned to cover the COVID-19 pandemic, the National Center for Medical Intelligence, or NCMI. But the military has been in the medical intelligence business since June 1941. When a medical intelligence subdivision was first established by the Army's Surgeon General. The Army remained the primary driver of military-related medical intelligence throughout World War II, and of course, this makes sense. The Army needed to be aware of medical threats and conditions facing the millions of U.S. soldiers who were deployed overseas during the war. Following the war, a separate U.S. Army Medical Intelligence and Information Agency was established in 1956, again, primarily to address medical issues facing U.S. troops overseas as our military presence expanded during the Cold War. This organization was incorporated into the Defense Intelligence Agency in 1963, and in respecting the principle of jointness, it was converted into a tri-service organization and rechristened as the Armed Forces Medical Intelligence Center, or AFMIC, in 1982. The executive direction of this organization was really unique. It was jointly managed by the Army's Surgeon General and the Pentagon's Deputy Chief of Staff for Intelligence. So you had a blend of specialized expertise in medical issues and that intelligence integration into the intelligence function. The role of AFMIC changed after 9/11, and attention increased on infectious diseases. Due to the concern that terrorist elements could weaponize such diseases as smallpox, and that this could become a threat to the U.S. homeland. In 2008, the organization was redesignated as the National Center for Medical Intelligence to underline this wider role in the U.S. intelligence community as a whole. NCMI is headquartered at Fort Detrick, Maryland, and its mandates include the production of all-source analysis on foreign military and civilian health systems, risks from infectious diseases, and risks from environmental factors. Its customers are military planners and national security policymakers charged with protecting U.S. interests across the globe. As a member of the intelligence community, NCMI has access to classified and unclassified information streams that are largely unavailable to international organizations such as WHO, and on the classified side may not be widely available to non-intelligence community elements such as CDC. NCMI employs a multidisciplinary team of virologists, epidemiologists, toxicologists, doctors, veterinarians, and other specialists with an immense amount of field experience in military and civilian life. Now, in terms of the pandemic, in early April, ABC News reported that NCMI provided an analysis on an emerging contagion in the Wuhan region of China in November 2019. This analysis was reportedly briefed to senior intelligence and national security officials in line with NCMI's mandate. On the civilian side of the intelligence community, the CIA had been following medical and health issues in the communist bloc since its inception in 1947 as an element of its comprehensive analysis of adversaries and potential adversaries during the Cold War. In 1952, the agency was given formal authority to cover civilian, medical, and health issues. The point here is that prior to the emergence of the pandemic, there was a significant portion of the intelligence community that was focused on worldwide medical and health issues. With regard to COVID-19, the appropriate role of the intelligence community, NMIC, and the other concerned elements of the intelligence community was to provide warning of the appropriate pandemic. What do I mean by warning? A key mission for all intelligence systems is to provide both strategic and tactical warning of impending national security threats. Strategic warning is advising of an existing threat without necessarily having specifics on the exact nature or timing of that threat. One example might be the Japanese intend to go to war in the Pacific prior to the outbreak of World War II. Tactical warning, on the other hand, provides specific details of an impending threat. The example would be the Japanese intend to attack Pearl Harbor in late 1941. With regard to the strategic threat, the intelligence community's annual worldwide threat assessment briefings produced by the ODNI cover a strategic warning on a wide variety of existing and potential threats. Now, the worldwide threat assessment briefings have highlighted the threat of a global pandemic since 2009. For example, the worldwide threat assessment in 2019 noted, "We assess that the United States and the world will remain vulnerable to the next flu pandemic or large-scale outbreak of a contagious disease that could lead to massive rates of death and disability, severely affect the world economy, strain international resources, and increase calls on the United States for support." There hasn't been a threat assessment in 2020, at least a public release of that threat assessment. However, in March, Time magazine reported that an annual intelligence report that has been postponed without explanation by President Donald Trump's administration warns that the U.S. remains unprepared for a global pandemic. Two senior officials who have reviewed the draft report tell Time. So this annual mention of the threat of a pandemic to U.S. national security constitutes strategic warning. Again, warning of a general threat with no specific threat or timeline noted. However, regarding tactical warning, press reporting from March 2020 notes that U.S. intelligence agencies repeatedly issued classified warnings about the specific danger of the coronavirus epidemic in January and February of this year. Press reporting also stated that the President's Daily Brief, which is the intelligence community's premier analytical product for disseminating information to key policymakers, contained more than a dozen reports on the novel coronavirus in January and February. This reporting indicates that the IC fulfilled its mission of providing repeated tactical warnings of the approaching pandemic. Thus, the U.S. intelligence community is uniquely well-resourced and structured to report on the pandemic. The NMIC is a unique organization, and there is a very strong reservoir of regional and functional expertise throughout the IC to contribute to analysis on these issues. Moving on to cultural aspects of the U.S. IC's ability to meet the challenge of the pandemic, different intelligence systems have different priorities or preferences in approaching intelligence problems, and we refer to this as part of the intelligence culture. Much of the information on the pandemic is in the open source or unclassified, what we call open source intelligence, or OSINT. Presumably, the IC's effort to understand the pandemic is also complemented by intelligence obtained through multiple classified channels. However, in this case, the key requirement is for informed all-source analysis, that is, for analysts with deep expertise on the subject matter to take the intelligence from these various unclassified and classified sources and compile them into a coherent narrative for dissemination to our policymakers. In this area, the USIC is very well positioned as well as a matter of that intelligence culture. The U.S. intelligence community strongly values the role of independent, objective, all-source analysis in its support to policymakers. Again, this is opposed to the Chinese or the Soviet, Russian, not Soviet anymore, Russian intelligence systems, which have underdeveloped analytical capabilities and appear to rely more heavily on raw reporting, pre-analysis reporting. What about the challenges? Although the intelligence community appears to have fulfilled its mission with regard to the pandemic, COVID-19 does pose a different and difficult challenge to the intelligence community. Within the intelligence community, we usually make a distinction between what we call traditional and non-traditional targets. Traditional targets are nation states, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and others, whose state actors who pose a political or military threat to U.S. National security. And the USIC has been focusing on these challenges for a long time. Non-traditional targets came later, and they are generally non-state actors. Of course, even pre-9/11 and certainly post-9/11, terrorists, but also proliferators of weapons of mass destruction and narcotics traffickers. These are forces that move smoothly over international boundaries and are not confined to a given state. So they pose a different collection challenge to the community. The COVID-19 represents a new type of target. There is no human agency involved in the virus per se. So, what should we call this new type of target? And I'll borrow from the current challenge and refer to this as a novel target. I want to make this distinction because, again, it impacts the way the intelligence community executes with regard to covering this target. The U.S. intelligence community, and in fact, those of most intelligence organizations carry out their missions through a process known as the intelligence cycle, through which intelligence organizations are first tasked to obtain intelligence by their policymakers, collect that intelligence through various methods or disciplines, such as human intelligence, signals intelligence, geospatial intelligence, or overhead geospatial or overhead intelligence. The next step is to analyze the intelligence collected through these various streams, and finally to disseminate that intelligence to the policymakers who need it. So the question is, if your target lacks human agency, how does this impact on our ability to carry out the intelligence cycle against this target? What it means to me is that some collection disciplines may be of limited use. And sadly, I'm specifically thinking of my own human intelligence, or HUMINT. You can't recruit a virus the same way you would try to recruit a penetration of Russia or China or North Korea. Some technical disciplines, such as geospatial intelligence, may also be of limited use. On the other hand, we can expect some collection methods to play a more important role, and I've already highlighted the role of open source intelligence, or OSINT, in this case. And I've also already noted that analysis is a really key intelligence in the intelligence cycle in terms of addressing the pandemic. Again, the United States intelligence community is uniquely positioned for this because of the historic, strong position of all source analysis in our intelligence culture. That's not to say it's all new and different with regard to COVID. There's a traditional nexus to COVID-19's challenges as well. Policymakers need to know the reaction of traditional state actors to the pandemic and its impact on them. This is a traditional mission, compatible with all of the collection disciplines, and not requiring significant adaptations by collectors or analysts across the intelligence community. The question of whether China obfuscated or concealed information on the outbreak, including its origins, as a matter of national policy, is in fact also a traditional mission. For example, in August 2020, press reporting indicated that the intelligence community had learned that local officials in Wuhan had failed to inform Beijing on the outbreak of the COVID-19 for a period of several weeks while they tried to tamp it down there. The press reporting further noted that when national level party officials did learn of the epidemic, they thought to obscure its full extent and potential impact. Incidentally, it's not only the U.S. intelligence community that's engaged by the pandemic. A really excellent New York Times article last month noted that the Russian, Chinese, and Iranian intelligence service, presumably among others, are all engaged in efforts to obtain information on the U.S. response to COVID. This includes attempts to steal medical information from U.S. labs and companies. This effort by our adversaries represents a new front in our counterintelligence concerns for the U.S. intelligence community. So it's both a matter of foreign intelligence going out and collecting information on what's happening overseas, and defending our own interests, which is a counterintelligence mission. In conclusion, the USIC is well positioned to continue to meet both the foreign intelligence and counterintelligence aspects of the pandemic. There is simply no intelligence failure here. With regard to lessons learned, it's pretty certain that the US will face future pandemics and perhaps other types of novel targets. For instance, that 2019 worldwide threat assessment I mentioned earlier notes population displacement, environmental, and climate change concerns are also threats to U.S. national security. Perhaps some of the lessons and best practices from the current IC experience with the pandemic can be applied to other such novel targets. For example, we may be approaching the point at which a National Climate Change Intelligence Center, perhaps jointly administered by intelligence and appropriate functional authorities such as NOAA, may be appropriate for the size and threat of that challenge ahead of us. Thank you very much for your time. I'll take questions.
Great. Thank you, David. That was a fantastic presentation. Thank you to everyone who's joined us this afternoon. If you have questions, go ahead and submit them through the Q&A tool. We do have a couple of questions that have already come in. The first is just a point of clarification. Did you say that the National Center for Medical Intelligence was tracking emerging viral activity in November 2019 or December 2019?
I said that as early as November 2019, NMIC was providing reports on the emerging contagion.
Great, thank you. So the next question is, can you speak about the schism between private security and intelligence agencies in relation to the Office of Director of National Intelligence and branches therein?
I don't understand what you mean by schism.
The person who's asking the question didn't sort of elaborate on that. I guess this person is assuming that there is a schism between private security and intelligence agencies, and is hoping to sort of...
one area, well, let me plug my own course. I'm personally concerned about the role of private intelligence agencies in non-public, non-government intelligence systems. When I was coming up, I assumed like war, like armed force, intelligence was only the prerogative of organized governments. We have moved well beyond that. We have to address intelligence threats by non-state actors, some of those non-traditional actors I talked about. Terrorists do intelligence. And they do counterintelligence. My concern about private intelligence agencies is not a schism. They're free to put out whatever they want to in terms of analysis or their own intelligence. My concern is that they operate with very, very little restriction. And there's been some very good journalism on private intelligence agencies being involved in murky activities. I think the New Yorker covered this with regard to the Weinstein case. He hired PIAs to sort of undermine the defense. I guess that's what the reporting said. So it's not a schism. To me, the issue is, are these guys insufficiently regulated? And is it time to look at that as a concern? In my course, we'll look at their possible involvement in industrial espionage, an area which, frankly, would not be legal.
Sounds great. So the next question is, does calling the novel coronavirus the China virus undermine the finding that no human agency is behind the pandemic? And does it make ongoing intelligence work and data collection harder?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Great. And then the next question is, in the spirit of R.P. Eddy and Richard Clarke, who are the Cassandras, the forward-looking truth tellers who are typically ignored in the intelligence community, who should people be listening to regarding critical infrastructure and the strain caused by COVID?
On COVID, I listen to our health. I would certainly respect our health authorities in and out of government. It's a matter primarily of science. In my opinion, it doesn't directly pertain to the intelligence aspects of it. I like Clark. I've got his recent book on my shelf. I think The Fifth Domain or something like that. And I think he's done some great work on responses to cyber espionage, responses to terrorism, among others.
Fantastic. Well, while we wait for some other questions to come in, is there anything else that you'd like to add to this? Actually, we just got a question in. So what opportunities, if any, do you see for bad actors, either domestic or foreign, secondary to the COVID pandemic?
I already mentioned that our adversaries, Russia, China, Iran, and probably others, are trying to find out what we're doing about COVID. They would typically be making efforts to acquire intellectual property, trade secrets, details on possible treatments, both to benefit their own societies directly, but also to commercialize those treatments and outpace us in the pharmaceutical industry and the biotech industry, where they're seeking, particularly China, is seeking to become a major player in that industry. Again, to plug my grad course, China is the major player in terms of economic espionage. They've been trying to steal trade secrets pertaining to biotechnology for years and years. In this respect, COVID-19, the treatments and cures for that represent a true gold mine. And I would expect them to be going all out to try to acquire that. Did I address that question thoroughly? Okay.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So the next question actually ties back into something we were discussing before the session went live, is what are the best books that you would recommend for someone who's interested in your type of government career?
My type of government career. So there have been a couple of excellent, not enough, but excellent memoirs by former officers in the Directorate of Operations. Richard Holm wrote The American Agent. Somebody I worked for and respect deeply, Jack Devine, wrote Good Hunting. And to preview my reading list, I think the most realistic novel dealing with the nuts and bolts of doing operations work in the foreign field was written by David Ignatius, and it's called Agents of Innocence. And a spoiler, that will be on my syllabus for the open enrollment course I'll be doing for you next spring. But again, popular culture is not a friend of trying to get a realistic impression of the trade. And I love reading spy novels, but you really have to take them with a grain of salt in terms of how well they represent what you really do when you're out there in the field.
That's great, and a wonderful plug for your spring course. The next question is, what prevents? Yeah, we did. That was a real question from the audience.
Okay, good. I would have planted that. I should have thought of that. Oh, and also, it reminds me on the previous question. So not only would presumably China, Russia, Iran be trying to acquire information, technology, and trade secrets to us on our coronavirus treatments and cures for their own pharmaceutical industries and medical industries. Let's not forget, when we talk about intelligence culture, these systems have a very strong bias towards something called active measures. And in that is misinformation, disinformation, and propaganda. So you would also look to these services to try to take advantage of any missteps in the U.S. policy response to coronavirus in order to weaken or create divisions in the United States and obtain a geopolitical advantage to that. Sorry, I left that off my response to the previous question.
That's great. So I'll attempt to combine the next two questions that came in because they're sort of trying to get to the same point. Is so what prevents the intelligence agencies from skewing reports to tell policymakers what they want to hear? And this person sort of cites Iraq and the weapons of mass destruction incident that happened in the early 2000s around this. And then a follow-up to that is, how would you recommend that we balance the critical need for objective reporting in the intelligence community and the utmost priority on secure communication within the government with the importance of public-private sector coordination, to your point about risks related to the intelligence community in the pharma industry, for example?
Okay. Objectivity and integrity are key aspects of the U.S. intelligence system, and that was drilled into me and all of my colleagues in the agency, at least, and I presume across the intelligence community from day one. You report the truth as you learn it as an intelligence officer. And you have faith in the system that intelligence is going to make it in an objective, unpoliticized form to our policymakers. I can say in my career, I've never run into something that would counteract that. I'd like to tell a story of my first tour when I served in a Southeast Asian country that was being ruled by a declining dictator. To coin, all of the lights were blinking red with regard to that regime, which was very important to us. Housed a major military base, and this guy had been an incredible ally during the Cold War, but it was no longer the Cold War. The reporting myself and my colleagues were obtaining at the time said, hey, this is not going well for this individual. This country is not going in a positive direction. You are going to lose it to an active insurgency that would not be as friendly to the United States. And there were a lot of people in the U.S. government and in my own organization to whom that was not good news. But nobody ever told me not to submit it, and nobody ever touched it on the way back to Washington. And that, to me, was an essential lesson from the earliest stages of my career. I can't say that politicization of intelligence, and that's what that's called. If the intelligence officers and intelligence managers alter intelligence to fit a preconceived notion that policymakers have, they have failed fundamentally in their mission. And this refusal to do that and the ethos against doing that is one of the key factors that separates our intelligence system, again, from that of Russia and China, where that happens all the time, where the intelligence culture says, ooh, you do not submit intelligence that's going to make the boss unhappy, or he is going to fire you, or worse. I think the intelligence community, the basic integrity of the intelligence community is intact. And if there's any pressure to politicize, that just has to be opposed on all levels within the organization and our oversight. We have intense oversight in Congress, and I presume that would come to their attention as well. That's part one of the question. I think I'd have to ask you again for part two of the question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so part two is about the secure communication within government, but also taking a look at the importance of public-private sector coordination, to your point about the risks related to IC in the pharma industry.
Right. I think public-private partnerships on the defensive side are just excellent right now. FBI has a mandate to educate the private sector. Department of Homeland Security has a mandate to educate the private sector. And so does an organization I worked for once, the National Counterintelligence and Security Center. So there's active outreach and active communication. And I think that is a real success story. Certainly based on what's in the press now, as opposed to when I was in government and actively working on this about a decade ago.
Great. And so taking that a step further, can you discuss the role of IC in building multilateral relationships globally, and how do you think that'll impact the response to COVID?
I'm not sure it pertains particularly to COVID, although in non-traditional areas, particularly terrorism, that have affected U.S. national security, international partnerships have been really, really important. But I haven't given much thought to how this might play out with regard to the pandemic specifically.
So a sort of related question is, do you feel that we have an ethical obligation to share information such as cures and treatments for global pandemics with the rest of the world? Or could more harm come from sharing that information because of bad actors due to misinformation propaganda?
So it's a bioethical,
Yeah.
it's a bioethical question. That's not an intelligence question. So my response is purely personal, and the answer is yes. As a matter of ethics, we should do the most we can. That said, we shouldn't let the information be stolen. It should go out the front door, not the back door. And where I come in as an intelligence officer, and having worked particularly on this issue of economic espionage, it hurts us when it's stolen. It can only help us when it goes out through the front door. It hurts us economically when it's stolen. It can only help us when it goes out through the front door. And in terms of national power, soft power, something intelligence officers don't talk about a lot. But the soft power of us being involved in an international response to COVID is immense,
Great. So the next question is, in recent years, it has seemed that the intelligence community has become more militarized in some ways. For example, the CIA as an arm of the Pentagon, kinetic solutions being applied to issues where human intelligence may be more effective. In the years to come, do you see a move back to human intelligence, recruiting of agents who can provide useful information, time, patience, diplomacy, and all the social skills that intel officers are trained for?
So that's a good question. The intelligence community is supposed to support use of all of the instruments of national power. I guess it's diplomacy, information, military, and economic. I think as a whole, personal opinion, that the military dimension of U.S. Foreign policy and national security policy has been really, really pronounced in recent years. Now, the intelligence community has always had a mandate to support our warfighters. That, to me, is not a difference. To the extent that we're using the military instrument more than other instruments, yeah, we'd be doing more of that. But the obligation of the intelligence community to collect on other areas never went away, to the best of my knowledge, and certainly not while I was a serving officer. To the extent that we become more worried about these traditional actors now, traditional challenges, China is the one people always talk about, but Russia is a perennial one. Iran, maybe we will be putting more resources, or maybe the intelligence community will be putting more resources on those traditional threats as opposed to supporting the military dimension of national power.
Great, thank you. So we are slowly getting to the end of our hour here, and so I did want to give you an opportunity to add any further thoughts that you have, something that may have been sparked from the questions from the audience, or just sort of a wrap up and some final thoughts for our attendees today.
I appreciate that. I guess the one thought, if somebody says that the U.S. Failure of the U.S. to respond properly to the pandemic was an intelligence failure, I guess what I'd like you to take away most was that it wasn't. And I do not think we need to do an extensive rebuild or inquest into the intelligence aspects of what happened. Right before I got on this, I saw Admiral Stavridis up at the Fletcher School is calling for a COVID commission. And there's plenty for a COVID commission to do. I'm convinced that if there is such a commission and it does look at the role of the intelligence community will come off very good in the context of this episode, and that we have got to look to other explanations for the severity here.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, this has been a fascinating hour with you. Thank you so much for your fantastic presentation. Thank you to everybody who was able to tune in today. We appreciate you spending perhaps your lunch hour with us. And we hope to see you again soon. And we'll be sharing information about David's spring courses with the group once it's available. So we hope that you'll be able to join us. Thank you again, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
I do hope to see some of you in class, virtually or in person, in the future. And again, I'd really like to thank NYU CGA for giving me the opportunity to do this talk. It's an important topic for me.
Thank you. Thanks, David. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.